Hello, I'm here this morning with the Honourable Linda Burney, Member for Barton and Minister for Indigenous Australians. Thank you for joining me this morning, Linda.
Thank you, Mayor.
First of all, the first question I'd like to ask, from your view, what is domestic violence?
Well, I think firstly I'd just like to congratulate the Council for doing this series of films and making this issue, or giving this issue the importance it deserves. Domestic violence comes in many forms, and one of the vital pieces of education, in my view, is educating people to recognise those signs. It can be financial, it can be what we call coercive control, where you're isolated, where you're stopped contacting your family, when you're told what to wear, and etc. Of course, it can be physical violence, it can be psychological violence, and it can be sexual violence. And very often there is a combination of many of those things in domestic violence being perpetrated against another one. And really it is about control. It is usually a man wanting to have total control of his partner, even after that relationship finishes, where we see such tragic outcomes.
Yes, and you've had a very long history of saying no against domestic violence. Why is this issue so important for you?
Well, a number of reasons. The level of domestic violence in Australia is huge. It's hard to find the words just to say how much of an issue it is in Australia. And I think Australia has only found the capacity to talk about it openly in the last 10 or 15 years. But there are still many communities in our wonderful diversity where domestic violence is under the mat, so to speak. And of course, most people would know that I've had a personal experience with a fairly long-term relationship that certainly involved domestic violence. I've also had a commitment professionally, being the Minister for Women for a very short period of time in New South Wales, but also the Shadow Minister responsible for the elimination of domestic violence in the Federal Parliament. I think it is an issue where there is no magic bullet. And most importantly, the best way that it's dealt with, in my experience, is when the community owns the issue.
Yeah, it's very important. And do you think as a nation we are making progress in eliminating domestic and family violence?
That's a really hard question. I think that some days I feel like we are, and then you get shocking examples that get a lot of media attention, where you wonder whether we're making any progress. But there are so many incidences of domestic violence that, of course, will never get into the media. And what really worries me is, of course, the homicides that we hear about. But there is also the permanent injury, the permanent brain damage, the disfiguration, and the psychological issues that not only affect the person that's been the victim of violence, but the rest of the family. It is fabulous that the federal government has released the 4th Action Plan. There will be a separate plan for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women because the incidences there are so much higher. And there is $1.7 billion being put towards domestic violence. Those things are positive, but the really positive thing also is that I think as a community now, we have a way to talk about this issue.
And that's vital, isn't it? And that's great to hear the initiatives that the federal government are doing. And so what can people do in order to contribute to preventing domestic and family violence?
Well, there are a couple of things. I mean, the fact that the council is doing this is an example. But I think being aware of the signs and what domestic violence actually is really important. Raise your children to be respectful of each other, respectful in terms of relationships, and also if we think that there's domestic violence going on, don't look away. They're the things that I would suggest.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing your experiences and playing an important role in preventing family and domestic violence. And thank you very much for your time.